The Inferno Rider hologram is one of the many new challenges Kuro have brought to Wuthering Waves, and even though most people don't even like the normal version of the fight, Kuro didn't pull any punches for his new challenge mode. However, one saving grace of the fight is if you've fought him before, you likely already know a lot of his moves. I'm almost certain most people with good teams already built won't struggle with this fight very much at all. However, I want to talk about the boss, go over his moves, bring up some tips I've found that might be useful to some people, the positives and negatives of the fight, how enjoyable it was, and lastly, if the new hologram can dethrone Tempest Mephis as the most challenging hologram. A couple of things before we get started. I'm going to refer to these as meteors. These rings are ground AoE attacks. These rings are just explosions. And lastly, I'm going to refer to Inferno Rider's weapon as a glaive. I don't know if it's technically not a glaive and it's actually a different weapon. It looks like a glaive to me, so that's what I'm going to call it. First, let's talk about his attacks starting in phase 1. He will start off phase 1 of the fight on his motorbike with him slamming his glaive down to the ground as he spawns. After this, he will perform random attacks. All of his random attacks do have somewhat of a sequence, however, we'll go over what that is at the end. So let's go over his attacks. First, he will quickly speed away, coming back to slam his rear tire. This will spawn a meteor indicated by the expanding circle on the ground, and that meteor will spawn a ground AoE. Every time a meteor falls down, it will leave behind a ground AoE that lasts for 3 explosions. These explosions can be dodged, but it will not trigger a perfect dodge. The rear wheel slam attack does have another variant, but at the beginning of the fight, Inferno Rider wants to spawn some ground AoEs, so he won't do that attack. However, the second variant looks almost identical to the first, with the only difference being he will raise his glaive up before swiping on the right side of his bike. This attack will not only hit you if you're behind him, but it can also hit you if you're on the left side of his bike, so be sure to try and dodge this attack. This attack though will not spawn a meteor. Second, he will stay close to you lifting up his front tire before slamming it back down. This will also spawn a meteor. Next is an attack that has 3 different variants. The first, he will lift his front wheel and his glaive into the air before trying to hit you with his glaive. This attack will spawn 2 meteors, both behind him and to his left. These aren't typically something that you need to dodge since he's trying to hit you on the right side, so the meteors will almost always be on the other side of him. The second version is the same as the first without the meteors, where he will lift his front tire for a second time before bringing his glaive down, doing a rather long range slash. However, this attack is typically pretty shit at actually aiming at you, and it's an attack you can often just DPS through if the first swing misses. This attack does not spawn meteors. The last version is the same as the second, but he will again lift his tire for a third time while aiming his spear towards the ground. Then he will stab into the ground doing damage and cause an explosion at the player's location, followed by 2 meteors on the left and right sides of his bike. The explosion happens just before the meteors hit, and if you dodge the explosion, you can typically counterattack through the meteors without getting hit. His last 3 attacks are not random, but happen after a certain number of his attacks. The first one, he will do a quick spin before popping a mad wheelie to show off how cool he is.
Cause I'm hella cool, that's why. That's not cool. You guys are just hella jealous.
After which he'll hit the rear brake a little bit too much, slamming down the front tire. This will cause him to throw a meteor at you. The second attack he'll do is he'll do some donuts before lifting his front wheel and then stabbing his glaive down into the ground, which will be followed by 3 meteors. The last attack he will do instead of the wheelie if you get a good distance away from him when he tries to do it. This can be easier to deal with than the wheelie is, but having to get some distance in order to trigger it isn't worth the DPS loss unless you're playing ranged. For this attack, he will get closer before trying to attack you with his bike's rear wheel. This attack will then trigger a meteor. The sequence in phase 1 is he will always do 2 meteor spawning attacks, followed by an attack that doesn't spawn meteors. Then he'll pop the wheelie. This will be followed by 2 more meteor spawning attacks, and lastly by doing the ground stab, followed by the 3 meteors. This sequence will repeat until his health reaches 0, after which he will transition into phase 2. 2. This will give him a full heal, make him stand up on his bike before throwing it towards you. He will also do this attack after recovering from being immobilized. From this point, he will mostly be on foot. Phase 2 doesn't seem to have a sequence that I was able to see. However, he has a typical combo that he'll do that I will go over at the end. However, let's talk about his moves and some general knowledge first. In Phase 2, he will still throw meteors and cause explosions sometimes. However, he will mostly throw motorbikes at you, and some of the bikes will leave behind a ground AoE. I will refer to these bikes that leave behind the ground AoE as AoE bikes, and the bikes that don't as normal bikes. The only difference I could tell between the two bikes was the angle that they spawned in the air. This is probably the single dumbest tell that I've ever seen from any boss yet. But since it doesn't really change the way you beat him, it doesn't really matter that much. I don't believe he has any range specific attacks in this phase, as if you get too far away from him, he'll just dash closer to you. The first attack, he will spin his glaive in his hand before stabbing it into the ground like a flagpole, causing a normal bike attack followed by a meteor to attack your current location. The next attack he does, he will slowly move towards you before swinging his glaive upwards, with the next attack being a parryable attack. If you parry him here, this will stop his attack combo. However, if you dodge or miss the parry, he will do one of 3 attacks. The first one that he can do is he will do another parryable attack, but if you miss this or dodge, this will be followed up by a dashing slash attack that triggers an AoE bike to attack you, followed by a regular explosion. The second version, he will charge up his glaive before leaping into the air and doing a ground slam. After that, he will throw an AoE bike at you. The third version, he will back away from you before dashing forward and trying to stab you with his glaive. After this, he will again throw an AoE bike at you. Another parryable attack that he does is again slowly moving towards you before swinging his glaive upwards. If this is not parried, it will cause an AoE bike to attack your location. The next attack that he does is jumping forward before cleaving the area in front of him, and afterwards he will again throw an AoE bike at you. The next attack, he will leap into the air before stabbing his glaive down to the ground, and afterwards he will again throw an AoE bike at you. The last attack he has is a long combo that has 2 different ways he can start it. We'll first go over the 2 different ways that he can start the combo, and then we'll go over what this combo does. The first version, he will jump backwards and summon a normal bike, and then while charging up his move, he will again summon another normal bike. The second way he can start it, he will jump into the air before creating 3 explosions in front of him at point blank range, before throwing an AoE bike followed by a normal bike. The bike throws will happen slightly faster than the first version. I actually found this out while getting footage for this video, but there is actually a third way that he can start this long combo, and I think the only trigger for it is after he jumps off the bike from the transition to phase 2 or after recovering from immobilize. This version is really hard to dodge since he will immediately throw a normal bike at you and start to charge up the combo attack, giving you very little time to react to it. There is also not a ground indicator for the bike explosion, so just keep this attack in the back of your mind and keep an eye out for it, and look for him to crouch down while lifting the glaive up onto his shoulder. So for the combo itself, Inferno Rider will jump towards you doing a 3-hit combo before charging up his glaive to do a cleave attack. This will launch him into the air and he'll do a slash, sending a small flame wave traveling along the ground. He will then summon and get onto his bike in the air and crash down to the ground before doing a spin attack, followed by a second spin attack where he throws the bike at you. At first I thought this might be a special skill, but I couldn't interrupt it with a special skill counter, so this is just a long combo as far as I'm aware. These are all the attacks that difficulty 6 Inferno Rider can do. However, this is just based off my experience, so if there's an attack that I've missed or there's a rare attack that he does, be sure to let us know down in the comments so other people can get informed as well. The typical combo you'll see from Inferno Rider is the flagpole.
Oh shit, not good.
Followed by the hunched over homeless man.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
This hologram not only tests your positioning, but also your patience, as getting greedy can often put you into bad positions for the ground AoE explosions to drain your character's health. Some tips that I found out when fighting Inferno Rider: if you try to aim your camera to the west when Inferno Rider is spawning a meteor, you can actually see it falling before it strikes the ground, giving you a better indication on when you need to dodge the attack. Also, unless you're insanely skilled, you don't want to fight him inside the ground AoE attacks unless you have some really good damage mitigation, so it's best to try and pull him away from them and into a more open area where you can freely DPS without much worry. Another tip would be, if one of the characters that you're using has a reposition like Shang Liao's skill does, this can be used to move out of the explosions without needing to dodge. If you're struggling to gauge where he's going to land with the wheelie attack, you can actually move to the point where he started it and just wait for him to come back around and dodge the front tire slam. Lastly, all of his glaive attacks will make the glaive glow when you should dodge, so you can just watch his weapon if you're struggling with dodging the attacks based off the animation. Those are all the general tips that I have, so let's go over the positives of the fight. The attacks in Phase 1 having somewhat of an order to them makes learning the fight a little bit easier and can help you get into a groove to more quickly get into Phase 2. He doesn't have any attacks that attack super fast like Axe's quick grab or Heron's wing sweep attack, so if you have bad reflexes but good timing, you might struggle a little bit less with this fight than some of the other holograms. Just like Crownless, most of his attacks don't hit hard enough to one-shot a character, so the fight is actually pretty forgiving when it comes to mistakes. But now let's talk about the negatives of the fight. There is no vibration bar or parryable attacks in the first phase, making it a lot harder for people who have low DPS and might want to immobilize the boss to take a break mid-fight and recover. The fight duration is the longest hologram by far, as he not only has 2 phases, but each phase has more health than the difficulty 6 Morning Aches hologram does in total. The ground AoE attacks can be dodged, but since they can't trigger a perfect dodge, they can quickly consume your available dodges and leave you standing there like a moron waiting to get hit. Some of his moves don't have very good tells or look very similar to his other moves, making fighting him something that requires your full attention. If you get too close during the wheelie attack, it can actually do damage to you, which is extremely punishing to melee characters, making the fight a lot more frustrating for no reason. The ground explosions constantly going off in the background cause an audio overload for the player, and I'm looking forward to seeing someone try to no-hit this boss blindfolded. I don't know how you're expected to be able to use any of the audio cues during the fight when your ears are constantly filled with explosions from the ground AoEs. Inferno Rider in Phase 1 on his motorbike moves so much and can make the camera spin around fairly quickly depending on your positioning, making it so that even if you get into a good position to do damage and not get hit by the ground AoEs, the boss can not only disorient you, making you forget your position in regards to the ground AoEs, but it can also push you into them at the same time. The ground AoE attacks can sometimes hit you a little bit after the explosion, making learning how to dodge, when to dodge, and when it's safe to stand close or inside of them incredibly frustrating to deal with. He has a lot of attacks that can hit you from off screen, making learning timing or listening to audio cues very important. Lastly, the motorbikes, meteors, and regular explosions from different attacks all have slightly different timings for when you need to dodge, making consistency for the average person really hard to learn, especially when the game gives you different hit feedback based off your ping. So how enjoyable is the boss for me? It's not. I did not have fun soloing Inferno Rider on difficulty 6 at all. Now, you might disagree with me on this, which is fine, but managing your positioning is not an enjoyable way to play a semi-fast-paced anime action RPG. And if you add the audio overload, the boss pushing your character around, some hitboxes being pretty shit in my opinion, and the fact that Inferno Rider is now the hologram with the most amount of health in the game, meaning you typically have to fight it for the longest, Kuro has created a recipe for a very unenjoyable experience, and in my opinion, it's not fun to fight at all. So is this hologram able to dethrone Tempest as the current difficulty king? I would say yes, but for all the wrong reasons. It's about on par with the difficulty of Tempest, but the fight is a lot more frustrating given that you can deal with Tempest clone very easily with parries and good timing. Inferno Rider though has throughout the whole fight things that are just frustrating to deal with. So even though this is in my opinion the new king of holograms, I'm only going to give this fight a 5 out of 10. It is not a good fight, it's not enjoyable, it has too much audio from the ground explosions, certain attacks punish melee characters but don't really do anything to ranged ones, and the fight punishes you for playing aggressive with ground explosions and some bad camera angles. So in all honesty, this fight is probably going to be something that my muscle memory doesn't learn very much, because I don't like to solo fights for the ego or just to make a video that hardly anyone's going to watch. I just want to solo them because for me, it's fun. But this fight makes me a little bit concerned that this is the direction Kuro wants to take future fights, and instead of making them more aggressive to challenge the player's skill, Kuro will make them more bullet spongy with tedious mechanics. I'm still going to try and solo Inferno Rider with characters when I do a hologram boss rush. However, because he has so much more health, he acts like a wall for a lot of characters that heavily benefit from being in a team like Gian, and since it's not an enjoyable fight, I'm a bit afraid that it's going to feel more like a job to make a hologram video than something that's fun to do in my spare time. So this video is probably not what you were expecting, and if you didn't like my take on Inferno Rider, feel free to let me know in the comments. However, as always, I do hope that you were able to enjoy the video, and if you did, you can leave a like or a comment, and if you'd like to see more content in future, you can subscribe to the channel. I'm sure some of the regulars of my channel have noticed that I haven't made any new videos for about 2 weeks. I won't go into detail why, however, long story short, there was a loss of a very special person in my family, so I apologize to anyone who was looking forward to more content, but I am back now, so we can hopefully go back to just making some regular solo compilations and general Wuthering Waves discussion videos. Also, while I've been away, I've been building Spectro Rover, Havoc Rover, and Chisha, so you might see an all hologram solo video from them pretty soon. I just need to see if Spectro and Havoc Rover have the DPS to kill Inferno Rider once they're fully built. But that will do it from me, so I hope to see you in the next video, and I'll catch us later.